Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you to today's high impact session on the Cornell Senior Executive Leadership Program. My name is Mike Pino, and I'm a former partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers who helped stand up the future of work practice. And I'm honored to moderate today's Q&A session. Today's session covers a part of the modules in the Cornell program, exploring a critical challenge business executives face: the interplay of innovation and leadership at the moment of geopolitical unrest, economic uncertainty, and the unknowns we face as we look to apply generative AI across our businesses and organizations. Whether you're leading transformation, navigating uncertainty, or scaling innovation, this conversation couldn't be more timely. Let me take a moment to introduce you to the Cornell Senior Executive Leadership Program. This program is designed for C-suite leaders and senior executives, blending cutting-edge research with practical, tailored learning experiences. With tracks curated for roles like CEO, CFO, CMO, CHRO, and more, it offers you a personalized journey into strategy, innovation, sustainability, and leadership. From immersive sessions in New York and Dubai to live online modules led by exceptional faculty like Professor Filipowicz, this 10-month program is about more than just learning. It's about transformation. When you complete the program, you join Cornell's global network of executive alumni as leaders shaping the future across industries and continents. Today's session is in a Q&A format with some brief opening remarks, and I'll be fielding the questions that you ask in Zoom to Professor Allan Filipowicz, who embodies both academic rigor and real-world insight. Let me take another moment to introduce Professor Filipowicz. He's a clinical professor of management organizations at Cornell's Johnson Graduate School of Management, and also the program director for this leadership journey. His research centers on how emotions influence leadership effectiveness, whether it's managing risk, leading teams, or negotiating under pressure, or simply showing up with the right mindset at the right moment. His work has been published in top journals across psychology, decision science, and even circadian performance. Yes, even your body clock is fair game in his research. Allan brings global experience, having taught executives across Asia, Europe, and the US, and with clients like Google, Medtronic, Bayer, and Harley-Davidson. He combines a deep academic pedigree, a Harvard PhD, a Wharton MBA, and multiple Cornell degrees, with hands-on experience as a consultant and former BCG leader. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Filipowicz, giving him a few moments, and we'll start answering your questions about thriving in ambiguity, leading with emotional precision, turning disruption into strategic advantage to the future of your organizations. As he begins his opening remarks, I want to direct your attention on Zoom. You'll notice a button in the More panel that says Q&A. Please use the Q&A button in Zoom to ask your questions. Professor Filipowicz.
Thank you so much. So thank you all for being here today, for joining us in this session. I want to make a couple quick comments about executive education in general and the SELP program in particular, and you'll see we'll end up talking about innovation and leadership. But I want to frame this sort of in a broader context. So the first question is why should someone of the caliber that we're looking for the SELP program, why should someone like that step away from their day-to-day activities and join an executive education program, SELP or any others? And that is a fundamentally important question because we tend not to realize that as we're working, as we're solving problems, as we're addressing issues in the environment that Mike talked about, what we are doing is we're dealing at the level of specific examples. We have a problem, we solve that problem. That problem is an example of something larger. And what executive education programs do is they remind you, they force you to think about what that larger thing is, rather than reasoning at the level of specific examples. This movement up to movement of up in terms of levels of abstraction, it sounds kind of theoretical, and sure, it's fun if you want to be academics, which I strongly recommend, by the way. But it's the thing that allows you to take your solutions and move them from one problem to a problem in a completely different context. And that is important because, as Mike talked about, our contexts are changing very, very rapidly. So this is what makes you more robust, at what makes your knowledge base more stable, in spite of the fact that the environment is changing. The ability to take what you know how to do now, abstract it up a level, and that allows you to maintain it as the context under you changes. That's why people think about executive education programs, even though they're very successful in their current lives. Now, why SELP and why this program at Cornell? Well, uh, there are lots. There are at the moment a reasonable number of 150 to 200-year-old, very large scale research institutions. And that's fantastic. They offer all very good programs. Cornell is one of them. For historical reasons, Cornell's activity in this space has been very small. And because it's very small, it allows us to try things that you cannot do in larger institutions, institutions that have been around for longer, simply because of a fundamental problem that we're going to talk about in a little bit when we talk about innovation and leadership. But basically, if you're large and successful, you have a lot of trouble innovating. And this program is very innovative. And what makes the program innovative is the fact that most programs are designed from the point of view of the university. That is, we're going to teach you about strategy. Why are we going to teach you about strategy? Because we have people whose job it is to teach strategy. Now, that's lovely, except that the problems that you face are not carved up by academic discipline. The problems that you face require heavy integration across disciplines. For example, strategy is, how do I look at the environment, find threats and opportunities, and align my organization to take advantage of that? I'm going to take advantage of those threats and opportunities. That's strategy. Strategy is, I don't care what resources I have. I want to see what's out there. Operations is, given the resources that I have, what is the best that I can do? So they are optimizing subject to constraints. You have to be able to do both, because if you cannot do both, then you'll have a strategy that you cannot support, or you have operations that are optimized in the wrong direction. But doing both requires really the core of what we're trying to teach in programs like this, which is cognitive flexibility. I can think like an operations person, and then I can switch and I think like a strategy person. And so this integration across domains is really the most valuable thing that you can get out of an executive education program. But most programs are not taught in this way. They don't teach in an integrated fashion. They teach in a modular fashion, and the modules are carved up in a way that doesn't align with the way your problems are carved up. All right. So finally, we get to innovation and leadership. Strategy is, I'm going to look at the threats and opportunities in the environment. I'm going to align my organization behind it. That's awesome. Except as soon as you're aligned, guess what happens next? The context, as Mike talked about, changes completely. And now you're fully aligned in the wrong direction, and you have to realign. And that is where the leadership innovation piece comes in. Leadership and innovation is, okay, how do I align and how do I realign? And that has much deeper problems than we think about. And the problems are deeper, or rather more intractable, because the problems exist not just at the level of the organization, but at the level of the team, at the level of you interacting with one other person, and also at the psychological level. There are strong reasons why people don't like change. And we can talk about that, and we'll certainly talk about it in the program. But the leadership innovation skills are the things that allow you to take the strategy operation alignment that you did before and realign as the context is changing, as Mike has been talking about. All right, that's the general introduction. I very much hope to see you in SELP, because we can have long discussions in detail. In the meantime, I'd love to answer some questions now.
Certainly. Professor Filipowicz, the first question actually came in from Zuhair. And this question reads, in a world of constant disruption, what's a common emotional pitfall leaders face when trying to innovate, and how can they best avoid it from derailing good ideas?
So I think this was the first question, right, Mike? The first
Yeah.
question. And to answer that question, you want to go talk to the person who has the 10th question and not the first question. And the reason you want to talk to the person who has the 10th question and not the first question is that the person who has the 10th question is concerned that their question won't be addressed. And in fact, there's a more important thing, and you'll see this more in the classroom setting than this setting. In this setting, we are an unbounded group. In a classroom setting, we're in a bounded group. But why are people annoyed when their question isn't answered first? They're annoyed when their question isn't answered first, in part because they're worried that their question will not be answered. But more deeply, more fundamentally, there's a status issue, right? The first person to talk has more status, and status is enormously important. I don't know if you guys are following the US political scene, but over the last 2 days or so, the only thing that we've been talking about is two individuals who are in a bitter, bitter fight. And the bitter, bitter fight has massive ramifications. Tesla stock took a 15% drop. I think it's back up again, but we're talking hundreds of millions and maybe billions of dollars in changes in value. Why? What is driving this? What's driving it is status, and more particularly, a threat to status. It turns out a threat to status is the thing that makes people not want to innovate. Why? Well, status is how the esteem we're held in the eyes of others. And that comes from essentially two things. And one of them is you know how to do stuff. And the other is you know people. Now imagine there's Mike. Mike knows how to do stuff and he knows people. And that's why we defer to Mike. We talk to Mike. But we're going to innovate. And in our innovation, we're going to ask Mike to no longer rely on the people that he knows, and also to no longer rely on the stuff that he knows. What is Mike's reaction going to be to that innovation? Mike is going to say, that's a terrible idea, which would be unfortunate if that's the direction the entire context is moving. So you as a leader need to be aware of that, not just for you, right? You're going to avoid innovations that will make your status go down, but aware of it also for your people, for your teams. Because when you think something is a really cool idea, if you're the head of the organization, lots of things seem like really cool idea because none of them are going to threaten your status. Whereas they may very, very much threaten the status of the people below you. And those are the people who are going to say, this is a terrible idea and kill it, even if it's the right thing, even if it's the right thing to do. That is one of the major breaks of innovation. We don't think about the status impact on the people below us, particularly if we're high enough up in the organization that our status is pretty much protected. I remember Elon Musk, before doing random things, launched a car into space. That, I'm going to argue, is maybe not a great idea, but no one said it because he's powerful enough, he's rich enough that his status is not in question in spite of what he does. Most of the rest of the organization doesn't have that luxury, and so they seem like they're resistant to change when in fact all they have is a status supports that aren't as deeply embedded, and so they're more worried about it.
That's a really interesting point. I'm going to follow up on something and tease it apart using your Elon Musk example, because one of the things he threatened yesterday was basically, I'm not going to send any NASA scientists up or explorers or astronauts up into space on my platform here at SpaceX, because if you're going to threaten me, I'm going to threaten you back, and now you can't get to space. And then he retracted that a few hours later. This is not something he normally does, and it's kind of interesting to do. But what you're actually indicating is that creating the space with your the people in your team to make better decisions for the organization. This is a really critical component of innovating. That's sort of what is that the concept that you're getting at here?
Yeah, so I love the expression you used of creating the space, because in essence, most people, more people than you could imagine, want to innovate under certain conditions. And the thing that we ignore in setting those conditions, we think about resources, et cetera, but the thing that we ignore is what I just mentioned, which is a psychological, technically sociological level issue, which is I, as the person, feel like my status is going to be enhanced or damaged by this thing that we're doing. Now, if you're the innovator, here's my cool idea, and everybody adopts your cool idea, your status is going to be enhanced. That's awesome. But you're asking people to change what they're doing. And when you ask them to change what they're doing, you're moving them away from the supports of their current status, which means you're calling their status into question. And so they think it's a terrible idea. And you can predict this from kilometers out. You can say, this might threaten that person's status. If you want to innovate, figure out whose status is going to be threatened, go protect them. And once you've done that, they'll be much more willing to go along. And now you can sort of see, is the innovation doing what we want it to do, et cetera, et cetera. But you can get to the real innovation challenges as opposed to getting stopped by something that we could predict and is unnecessary.
That is a fabulous one. It ties into the. I'm going to choose your point about skipping to the 10th question, but I'm going to skip ahead to the third question. One of the things that that you're raising here is sort of talking about the challenges that exist in creating that space and really the role of being a leader in innovation. This question reads, what's one quick practical thing a senior leader can do next week to get their team trying new things and taking smart risks without feeling like they're losing their grip? And this is from Mona.
I think I want to suggest two things rather than one, but we'll tie them together. If you want people to try new things, then you need to emphasize the try bit. And what happens is we ask people to try new things, and the undercurrent is new things that are going to work really well. And because of that implicit try new things that are going to work really well, people don't try new things because they're worried about, is it going to work really well? And the way to get that to work is to say, I want you to try new things. And the metric is, I want to see lots of mistakes. That is, I want to see lots of rejections. I want to see lots of failed experiments. Why? Because to get lots of failed experiments, all you have to do is lots of experiments. And then you're trying new things. And when you're doing that, inadvertently, some stuff is going to work because that's what happens in reality. But what we hope and pretend is we are so clever that we're going to try new things with a high level of success. And if you think that's going to work, then you're going to be very surprised to know that the more dangerous thing between sharks and vending machines is vending machines. Vending machines are much more dangerous than sharks. Why are vending machines much more dangerous than sharks? Well, there are many, many more interactions between people and vending machines than between people and sharks. Now, obviously, if you had a choice to be in a pool with a shark or a vending machine, choose the vending machine. But that's not the reality that you're facing. What happens is you can see many vending machines, you'll see very few sharks, you'll get your money stuck in a vending machine, you'll start to push on it, and if a vending machine falls on you, it's really bad. Now, the reason I bring that up is it's a base rate thing, and we tend to ignore base rates. And so here we are happily thinking about innovating, and we're aware of successful innovations. We are not aware of all of the failures behind it. And so we ignore the base rate. The base rate is your success. The number of things that work over the number of things that you try is a very, very small number. If the boss says, I want you to try new things, and doesn't explicitly say, I want to see tons of failures, people won't try new things because they're used to not trying new things, but doing stuff they already know how to do. And if you're doing stuff you already know how to do, then your success rate is much higher. If you take that base rate of success and move it over to the innovation side, you will immediately be facing existential dread because there's no way you'll be that successful. And so you as a boss, as a leader, need to say, I want to see lots and lots and lots and lots of failure.
It's a really interesting point, and I love that. Consider the base rate. That's definitely something to underline. The next question that came in is from Andrews. And this question is, for senior leaders trying to bring in new innovative ways of working, what's often the hardest psychological hurdle they or their teams hit? And where should they even start to tackle it?
So I think we've been talking around some of these things. Um, so we talked about status and protecting status. We talked about misunderstanding the base rate of success. That is, your success rate is going to be extremely low. And so what you should focus on is not the success. You should focus on the efforts and in fact the failures. You want lots and lots and lots of failures because you cannot predict the future. And so what you're doing is essentially following a portfolio approach. You're trying lots of stuff. Some of it will work, but you cannot tell in advance which it will be. And so you're better off with lots and lots of stuff rather than trying one or two things and praying that one of those two things are going to work out. Now, at the level of the team, right? Uh, Here is what people love to tell their bosses, and this gets back to the base rate issue. Hey, boss, I tried something and it was wildly successful. Everybody loves that. Very few people like to go up to their bosses and say, hey, um, I failed. And you said it was okay because that's how you learn. So I tried something else and I failed again and I failed again and I failed again. I mean, sure, you give them a rousing speech on Monday, they'll tell you they failed one time, but they need to tell you that they failed 100 times. And that's the issue. Will your people tell you that they failed fast? And if they will, let me ask you a more difficult question. Will people tell you that you failed fast? Will they come up to you and say, that's an incredibly stupid idea? If you can generate that level of feedback, that level of information flow, then it's much, much easier to try stuff because it's perfectly fine. For example, um, imagine you're flipping a coin, and if it comes up heads, you win, and tails, you lose.
Mhm.
There's no hesitation on the part of the person flipping the coin about what it is, heads or tails, because they don't feel like it reflects poorly on them. Remember, we talked about the status thing if it comes up tails rather than heads. Innovation is exactly the same way. Succeeding and failing when you're innovating does not reflect on the person. It's independent of the person because, once again, you cannot predict the future. If someone can predict the future, then yes, you should definitely punish them for failing and reward them for succeeding. But otherwise, you want people to try stuff like flipping a coin. If someone telling you, your subordinate telling you that you failed, they will do with the same ease that they would tell you, hey, I flipped a coin, it was heads rather than tails, then you're fine. And if not, then that's the thing you need to work on. The level of psychological safety that allows people to say, I tried something, I failed, you tried something, you failed, I tried something, you failed, right? Any of those variants.
In some ways, then what you're actually getting at is that base rate. The real challenge here, the hurdle that actually exists, isn't in just actually having a large number of experiments, but it starts first with mindset and changing the mindset both upwards. Am I able to tell my boss that this is a really not a very good idea and you might want to think about doing it this way, or you may want to think about doing it that way because these things we've seen before and we've tried before and they don't work? And vice versa, having the same kind of conversation come from above to below. How much are we actually really, by our actions and our words, reinforcing that it's okay to try and fail and learn, especially that third component where we're learning what to do differently next time? And so, in this way, what you're actually getting at is that the first challenge is actually creating the communication or the space for that to happen. And if you don't have that, it doesn't, in some ways that's going to be one of the real challenges or the first hurdle that you're going to have to face. This brings us to the next question that came up here. And so this question is, it's really hard when you're in chaos or crisis to switch from survival mode to opportunity mode. what are some of the tricks as a leader that you can help your team start to look at this differently?
So we spend a lot of time on this in the program. It's a fairly uh, involved topic,
Mhm.
but but let me give you a simple analogy. Imagine you don't swim very well, and
Mhm.
you're in deep, deep water, and you're currently also in deep, deep trouble because you're holding an anchor. You're holding an anchor. An anchor is heavy and it's something that goes to the bottom. And you're desperately thrashing about, trying to stay afloat, holding this anchor. Beside you is a life preserver. And someone says, why don't you hold on to the life preserver? And you say, can't hold on to the life preserver, can't reach out to the life preserver because I'm too busy trying to keep afloat holding this anchor. That's the mistake we make in times of crisis, right? If you're in a time of crisis, then what you're currently doing is not working, because if it were working, it wouldn't be a time of crisis. So that means that the thing to do is to let go of the anchor and reach for the life preserver. If you say, I can't reach for the life preserver because I'm using that hand to keep me afloat, you don't understand the situation. That hand is keeping you afloat and thrashing wildly because you're trying to hold that anchor up. Let the anchor go. Anchor is not working anymore. It was a life preserver. Now the environment has changed and it's an anchor. You need to let it go, recognize that it's going to be tumultuous for a little bit, grab the life preserver. And what we do is we in fact do the opposite of that. We just grip tighter and tighter to the anchor and thrash more and more. That's the fundamental challenge. Innovation is important. Innovation is mission critical when the environment turns into a time of crisis, and that's when we're the worst at it. That's when we cling most tightly to the anchor.
That's a fabulous way to answer that. We have about six more questions, and unfortunately, I should have jumped to the 10th question to begin with because we only have about 3 minutes. So I'm going to try to put a couple of these together. I'm probably going to mangle some people's questions, but I'm going to try to actually get your questions answered by putting them together. Um, so one of the questions actually had to deal with AI and resolving things. A lot of the challenges that exist when you're facing incomplete or conflicting data, you also are facing uncertainty, and a lot of the stuff that we do when we face uncertainty is to try to find new sources of information. And AI often provides a different lens or perspective to see things, but it doesn't actually offer you the answer. It offers you a point of view. How can you tell? And the second question, this is why I'm trying to tie them together. The second question is, how do people who thrive in ambiguity or struggle with ambiguity or struggle with incomplete conflicting data, whether it's coming from synthetic forms using AI or from the team or from sources inside or outside the company, when you're trying to make sense of this all, what are some of the ways that leaders who thrive in ambiguity, what are some of the things that they do? And is this learnable? Is this something that you can practice and get better at?
Uh, it is learnable. Um, I, I'm almost gonna say it's misdiagnosed. So let's try to do this very quickly. There are some people who want closure, and there's some people
Mhm.
who don't, right? Well, there's some people who want to get to the answer, and there are others who are perfectly happy to explore, continue exploring, right? So th this is a
Mhm.
personality difference. If you're the kind of person who really likes to get to the answer, then what you need to do is reframe the question, if you will. And that's what allows you to explore more. So you don't want to get to the answer, you want to get to 50 answers. That's the new goal. And the getting to the 50 answers is what's sort of nudging you to explore more. The thing that's causing people to uh, uh, drive in one direction or the other, though, looks like a personality difference. But again, I want to go back to the status thing. Are you protecting the status? And if you're protecting the status, then people are much more willing to explore. Because during the exploration phase, you have no idea what's going to happen. And as long as you make that the goal, I want to be in a state where I have no idea what's going to happen. I'm just kind of playing with stuff, right? Then people are more willing to thrive in ambiguity. I'll give you another very quick example of this. If you're playing a video game, particularly one of these sort of world exploration type games, you don't want the answer because the answer is the end of the game. You want to do the exploring. That's the game part of it. If someone came up to you, you just bought an expensive video game, and you're happily exploring, and they say, I'm going to tell you the answer, you'd be very angry at them because that ends the game, that ends the fun. And so if you reframe what you're doing in that way, I want to be playing this game. I don't want the answer. That sort of nudges you towards more ambiguity. I want to kind of tie back one last thing that we said, which is what you want to do is not drive innovation yourself alone. You want everybody else to be involved in it. And so one kind of fun thing to think about is if you want to innovate, don't innovate on your idea. If what you're trying to do is learn how to innovate to practice to get your teams up to speed on this, but rather do it with one of your team's ideas. If you do it with one of your team's ideas, it's much more likely that the status issue will be addressed. It's much more likely that they're willing to talk to you and give you that feedback that we've been talking about. It's much more likely that they're willing to play and explore because it's their idea. They want it to work. And the mistake that we make is we come in with our idea, the leader level idea, and then we say, how come people are not interested in innovating? Well, to start with, it's not their idea. So you immediately run into all the problems that we've raised.
Professor Filipowicz, I could probably talk with you for several hours, and I'm sure a lot of people on this call certainly would appreciate being on that same sort of wavelength. But really want to just thank you very much. I mean, your points about cognitive flexibility, about expanding the base rate, about making sure that you're paying attention to the status of others and actually using this. And finally, your final point that innovation is a team sport. And the more that you actually leverage that and tie that together, the more that you start to produce better results. These are really powerful kinds of concepts. I'm sure that, as you shared with us, that, some of the things that we cover in the Senior Executive Leadership Program, we go a lot deeper into these concepts and these ideas. And I hope that people take the opportunity to explore further and to see whether, Senior Executive Leadership Program at Cornell is right for them. Thank you so much for the time today. And thank you all for actually asking your questions and participating.
Mike, thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us today.